You could just do it shirtless. That wouldn't be awkward at all. The Formula America podcast with Kurt and Dylan's nipples.
Nice.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Formula America podcast with your host, Kurt and Dylan. And this is the Bahrain GP edition, our first and the first race recap of the season. We've been waiting for this one for a long time. And what a race, too. What did you feel about the race? Or how'd you feel about that, Dylan?
Dude, what a race. It was kind of your classic, like, no safety car, no crazy crashes, but like the beginning of the race was awesome, tons of craziness, and then it kind of settled into the rhythm of the race. And then like the last 15 laps ramps right back up again to craziness. And
yeah, afterwards I was thinking, I was like, that was a really good race. And then I was like, was it? It's like, it doesn't stand up next to like some of the classics from last year, like Coda, Silverstone, Brazil. But it's been so long, and it was actually a decently entertaining race. Like you said, it kind of settled into a rhythm at some point, but it was good, man. And I will say, I thought it was all over on the first lap. This whole Fernando Alonso like hype train and all. I was like, classic Lance Stroll, just about to just end it right here, lap one.
What an idiot. Like, everyone's like, oh man, here it is. I was actually texting a buddy of mine and I called it because at first I was like, he was like, what's your prediction? And I was like, it's going to be Max, Checo, Leclerc. Like 5 minutes later, I was like, no, I'm changing it. It's going to be Max, Checo, Alonso. He was like, that's crazy. And then first lap, Lance Stroll straight into the back of Alonso. You're just like, are you fucking kidding me?
After everything I just said, that you're not that bad of a driver, and here you go, proving me wrong.
It's funny because like you don't like his dad's face, and I could care less. Every time I see a picture of Lance Stroll, I hate his face. He looks like the stupidest. I hate him. He's the worst.
Man, I couldn't believe that. If that would have been the end of the saga of the story, it would have been like, I'm done. I'm turning the TV off at this point.
I want to know what Fernando said in the background off camera after the race. After he got the podium, I'm sure he's pretty happy, but he was like, dude.
Right.
How stupid are you?
I can't believe with how like politically correct Fernando has been since he's gotten to Aston Martin when it comes to Lance. Like,
yes.
You see after the race, he's like praising him for being such a good teammate and like all his posts and everything. It's like, what's going on in the background? You're being such a good boy, Fernando. I want to see when the wheels fall off.
Which is not your MO in any way, shape, or form. Even in Drive to Survive, Alonso's like, I'm the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah, right? He embraces being the anti-hero.
He does.
You have to have a villain.
You do, and he loves it. The way he like left to go to Aston Martin, he like just kind of chuckled and was like, I'm going to Aston. I don't really care what Alpine thinks.
What a smart move now, looking back at it.
Oh, man.
Because at first, everybody's like, why would you leave Alpine, who's up and coming, and you're going to Aston Martin? And now look who's got the last lap. Well,
I wonder
for now,
how
it's
much,
the first race, so.
Yeah, first race. But I wonder how much of it is also like personality between Otmar. And like you can see it in the Drive to Survive. He's so almost overly chill. He's like that boss that wants to be your friend.
Yeah,
and everything's okay, and it's like kind of weird. I don't know how well I would work under something like that, and then go into like a Lawrence, and it cracks me up that the Aston team principal's last name is Crack. But
yeah,
I'm immature. I'm sorry, Mike Crack.
Mike Crack. I saw a meme. It was like that old song. It was like my neck, my back, and Mike Crack.
But I can see there being like an appeal. If both teams are relatively up and coming and you're looking at the leadership of the team, I would personally pick Aston Martin every day of the week over Alpine. So maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe Alonso saw something in that car. I mean, and it's awesome because Alonso's such a good racer. He's just every time, even when he was in that terrible Alpine, like holding off Lewis Hamilton in the best Mercedes ever in 2021, like watching Orlando fight I keep saying Orlando. Alonso fight is just awesome. And then having him in a car that can compete, and we already got some of it, right? Like he went up against Lewis, and what awesome racing that was cool. For 2 whole laps of just, and you could tell, I think both of them were enjoying the crap out of it.
Yeah, dude. This guy it's so much fun to watch him this year.
Yes. I don't think that's going to be the last podium either. The question becomes is can they keep development up? I think it's interesting. A lot of you watch the driver interviews post race, and like both George and Lewis were like, we're clearly the P4 team. We're the fourth fastest on the grid. I think it's interesting because Alonso and most of Aston is like, hey, we're P2 today. We'll see where this goes. And Ferrari's just over there with, another engine fire. Or dumpster fire, or however you want to look at it.
Oh my god!
But the Ferraris look good, man. They look fast. They were clearly not anywhere as fast as the Red Bull. Absolute domination. But Ferrari looked good. They looked like a solid P2 contender.
And going into this, they were both like Charles Leclerc. He had multiple interviews where he was like, "Yeah, I don't think we're going to be fighting for podiums or anywhere fighting up there." And then qualifying, they come out and they're putting in good lap times. So, but I mean, we had the same thing with Ferrari last year. Ferrari had a fast car, but their strategy was complete shit, and their reliability was the same.
Yep. And they had to turn the engines down last year to make them last longer. I mean, after this first race, they're going to be considered doing the same. It's interesting during quali, they knew they couldn't compete with a Red Bull front row lockout. So instead of throwing a brand new set of softs on there and going out, they saved their softs and didn't go out again, which was, hey, at least they're showing some form of strategy.
Right. Yeah.
And it worked out for him. I mean, on lap 1, lights out, Perez has a horrendous start, and Leclerc gets in front of him, and hell, Sainz got in front of him too, but it was 3 cars wide through the first turn, and Sainz just couldn't get past him. But he was in front of him for a second. Like, Perez's start was that bad, but that Ferrari was fast, and Max was waving bye-bye.
I know,
driving off into the distance.
Dude, I couldn't believe Perez got such a crappy start, man. It's just like, it's like he wasn't even watching. And then, once Max gets out, even Perez was like, once Max gets out that far ahead, there's nothing we can do. I don't know, even if Max didn't get that far ahead and Perez got a good start, there's nothing Perez is going to be able to do. There's nobody on that grid that can go toe-to-toe with Max Verstappen in that Red Bull. Your only hope is to get in front of him and try to hold him off.
Yeah.
But other than that, if he starts the race, if he hits turn 1 in first place, it's a wash at that point.
Yeah, it's off to the races then. But I think that also continues our point that we've got a lot of flack for, so I'm going to keep bringing it up, about whether Checo is the right man for that seat.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of, so let's not, because there's a lot of emotion around the whole Checo thing. Is Carlos Sainz the right man to be in number 2 for Ferrari? How far back was he from Leclerc, right up until Leclerc's car caught on fire?
I think he was like 10 seconds back from where I remember.
I mean, he was a ways back there. He was barely, Lewis Hamilton was catching him in a car that is clearly slower than the Ferrari.
Right.
This is Carlos's second year in that, or third year in that Ferrari. He's had 2 full years of it. Like, you don't get to say I'm still getting used to the car at this point. Like, you need. So is Carlos, he's clearly the number 2 in the back. And if Checo's doing the same thing, like, it shouldn't be such a big driver's difference. Like, you look at Mercedes, George or Lewis in front could go either way. Both are, I think Lewis is still clearly a much better driver, but George is a hell of a driver. He's not there just to pick up second. He's able to, compete still. And Checo's there to ward off Leclerc until his engine blows up.
I was thinking about one thing when Leclerc went out with that the issue with the car, and that's if Ferrari's not careful, Carlos Sainz could very well find himself being the number 1 driver at Ferrari.
Yes,
because Charles Leclerc is, I'm sure, like right now he's had enough. He's had it, right? He's had multiple years of this going on, and if he's not looking for another drive. Right, like I wouldn't be surprised if both Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris are getting blown up by other team principals from the likes of Red Bull, Aston Martin, perhaps any other new teams coming in. They're probably blowing them up right now, trying to get them
in
to
Drive to Survive, they were when the whole driver lineup was getting swapped around. during the summer break, and they were interviewing they weren't interviewing the principals. They were just like overhearing them. Lando's name was in every single one of those. Like, we could go for Lando. I mean, that tells me that it is clear he is available.
Yep. And both of those guys have to be so completely frustrated because they're such wasted talents right now. You know, Charles Leclerc gets that little taste all the time. He gets that taste, and then it gets ripped out from under him. Lando's just floundering at the back this year, just not even, you know, you saw when he finally got lapped and he's sitting there behind Lewis and all them, like, that's how it should be, because he was actually keeping pace with him at that point.
Yeah.
But that's how it should be. He shouldn't be a lap down doing that. He should be fighting for one of the top spots. So
yeah, and I mean, even the commentators are talking about him, how awesome Lando is, and how Lando does what Lando does Lando things. I mean, gets that car all the way up into Q3, like, and that car's hot garbage.
Yep.
It was impressive. So, we start the race. Perez terrible. Leclerc's on new softs. He gets ahead. Lance Stroll. All I wrote down was Stroll sucks as he crashed in the back of Fernando.
Classic Stroll.
Piastri. So let's talk about the rookies. So all three of the rookies are in the bottom 5, but Logan Sargent is the fastest rookie who tied dead even to the thousands Lando Norris's McLaren, but Lando said it first. So Logan Sargent could have been in Q2 in a Williams.
Yes.
Race gets going and Piastri looks pretty good, actually. He's, moving up a little bit, but so is Logan Sargent. It's like, oh man, Nick DeVries and AlphaTauri and Yuki Tsunoda are floundering in the back. At least we got one prediction right. And then Piastri on lap 15 has what appears to be a steering wheel issue. Comes into the pit, they swap the steering wheel, and then from like the overhead film footage, you can see the steering wheels doing like the Windows startup.
The boot screen.
Yeah. And you're like, ooh, I don't think it's supposed to do that.
God, come on.
And then he gets retired.
His steering wheel basically did what your computer did 2 podcasts ago. Yeah. Just hard reset right in the middle.
Race. Meanwhile, Ocon is just in the back getting whipped by the stewards and penalties.
It was like, Ocon's got a penalty. It's like, oh, that sucks. Ocon's got another penalty for not serving his penalty correctly. Oh, that sucks.
Ocon got another penalty. 4 penalties for a grand total of 20 seconds. And so I watched a video from Sam Collins this morning that broke it down. So the first penalty was because Ocon lined up outside of the starting box. Your front tires have to be in front of the box. He was clearly outside of the box. Like, he even zoomed in on it. Like, Ocon lined up on the starting grid wrong. So he got a 5-second penalty for that. So he comes in because he has the nose damage. And you're not allowed to touch the car in any way, shape, or form until all 5 seconds are served. So all of the mechanics like came in to grab and change the nose out, and they were hovering. And one of the mechanics leaned too close and touched a bolt 4.6 seconds into waiting. So 0.4 of a second. He got hit with the 10-second penalty. So he comes back around and he gets caught speeding in the pit lane by 0.1 kph. Which also resulted in a fine of £100.
Oh my God!
That's for all of us Americans. Or like euros. It's like $120.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous.
And so he got hit with another penalty for that.
Jeez. He wasn't the only one. Also, Gasly got the same €100 fine on quali day. And it's just like, these guys are making millions of dollars a year, and you're going to hit them with £100, £100 euro, whatever they use over there, 6 pence, 100 pence fine.
Quids.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, at like lap 15, we start getting pit stops. Like, everything is kind of settling into the race, except I look up and Bottas is in P6 after his pit stop. He was legitimately like, it wasn't that he hadn't pitted or anything. Like, he was same pit stop as everyone else, sitting in P6. It was like, oh, where did you come? Even the commentators were like, whoa, how did Bottas get up there?
Completely out of nowhere, it seemed like.
And And then, yeah, we just kind of, Red Bull took an interesting pit stop chat. I think everyone except for Ocon and McLaren did basically soft, hard, hard. And Red Bull did soft, soft, hard. And so then they basically double stacked and threw softs on both cars, which is totally interesting. I was watching a thing on that this morning, and they said essentially they're trying to cover off a safety car midway through. They're worried about being on a set of hards. Safety car happens. Leclerc comes out on a set of softs. They get all bunched up. Leclerc's going to get in front. So they thought that they could run 2 cents of softs, get enough of a gap where if there was a safety car, they'd be okay.
That's smart. One part that I found interesting about the Perez's pit stop is you remember the car kept slipping off of the jack.
Yes.
Especially like the nose jack. But it's crazy to me that the pit stops are so fast that even while it's slipping off of the jack, they were still able to change the tires before it hit the ground.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it was just impressive to see like how quick those pit stops truly are.
Yeah, it's insanity. And interesting, like just to hear the thought process on their tires and all that good stuff. I mean, the Red Bull looked just absolutely untouchable.
For sure, yeah.
And so, that was the other thing I was going to say. So the hard tire that they used for this race, the C1, is the new tire. So they now, the Pirelli lineup used to be C1 to C5, C1 being the hardest. They now have a C0, which was last year's C1, and they did an in-between C1 and C2, which is like a brand new tire compound. That was supposed to like basically not degrade due to heat. It just wasn't supposed to perform as well. So basically you get like a very similar level of performance. It doesn't really matter how hot the tire gets or how much deg it has. But you're just not getting as much performance out of it, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then kind of business as usual. And then we get to lap 37 and it's Alonso v Hamilton.
That was awesome. That was so cool to see. Just sitting there watching the interval tick down. You're like, he's catching him. This is going to be good. Like, you knew that was awesome. You got two guys, the oldest two guys on the track, 41, 37 years old, 9 world titles between the two. Like, this is what you want to see.
Yes,
and it did not disappoint. They almost, I thought, what was that? The first time, I think Alonso also thought that Lewis was going to come into him because you saw he kind of like whipped out. And then it's like reeling him back in. Here we go again, man. That was such an exciting battle.
Yeah, and I mean, I thought they talked about it a lot more on the Alonso versus Sainz. You could just see it more clearly. I think everyone was surprised at the aero package on that Aston, how well it could turn and how much traction it had. You saw when on the Hamilton battle, but more so on the Sainz battle, like Alonso would all of a sudden jerk and the car like went. Mm-hmm. And I think he was expecting it to slide a little bit. I don't think he was expecting it to be so planted on the ground that when he turned, it would turn that well. And he almost took Sainz out. You saw it with Hamilton. Like they're like, oh man, Alonso looks jerky. And I was like, I don't think it's that he's jerky. I think that the car is that well planted. Yeah. That has that much traction that he's used to having to kind of overcorrect because she's going to slide a little bit. It's going to understeer a little bit. And no, the car just went. And I think it was catching even Fernando Alonso.
You could see that very clearly on the, like you said, I think it was turn 1 going in on Sainz where they show the aerial view and you just see that car just like shoots forward, almost takes Sainz out. But yeah, that was wild. And the other crazy part is you've got an Aston Martin that is running a Mercedes engine that is clearly outperforming the Mercedes. Granted, it's kind of almost like a Red Bull clone, so it's like a hybrid Red Bull Mercedes right there. I guess the best of both worlds at that point. And it's so much faster than that actual works Mercedes car. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's insane, and they just did such a good job with the aero package on that. I hope they can keep the development up because that car might be something that might compete with Red Bull, especially, I mean, because Mercedes is synonymous with reliability. Like they don't have engine issues. They don't really have many issues at all. I mean, the fact that during testing on the second day, they're like, oh my gosh, George Russell sat out for the second half of P2 of this, of the session because they had a hydraulic issue. This is Mercedes. That doesn't happen. Like So you put, I mean, a great aero package and get that car up there, it's going to be reliable. So, and then Leclerc goes out, right? So speaking of reliability, engine failure, like the engine just stopped. You got to just be like, oh no.
What was that? 15 seconds or 15 minutes you cut out.
Uh-oh. What was the last thing you heard?
You said it's going to be reliable, and then you said
it's going to be reliable. So, and then speaking on that, let's talk about not reliable, because right afterwards, Leclerc pulls over because his engine died.
Jeez, did they ever say what that was?
No. Engine failure, something though, because like you go to the overhead cam, the engine just shuts off.
Yeah. You could just see as soon as they cut to that clip and you see the Ferrari pull to the side going slow, you're like, oh, here we go again.
Classic.
Classic Ferrari. Like, come on. Charles Leclerc, like, he's got to be so frustrated and upset.
I love the video or the shot they took of Piero Ferrari, the vice president of Ferrari, and you could just see anger. I was like, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I would be too.
Yeah, that's got to be so frustrating. So, that Aston looks good. Ferrari. Oh, Mercedes. So there's been a ton of talk on Mercedes, and Alonso said something as well that I'm going to link together because I thought it was really cool. In a speech, or not a speech, an interview before, like during qualifying or in between the practices, Alonso said one of the huge reason he picked Aston Martin was a lot of the other teams were shooting for P4. They wanted to be the best of the rest. There was no conversation of competing with Red Bull. And he said that really, really frustrated him. And you can see that in McLaren, in Alpine, in a lot of those where they're talking a big game, but they kind of feel like they're just shooting for the best of the rest. Like they know they can't compete at that top three. And I thought it was interesting yesterday with Toto interview after the race. He said, we're not trying to get a 0.3 improvement out of this car. We need so much more to compete with Red Bull. I think Mercedes is going to bring a more conventional, probably Red Bull style car to the grid soon.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of speculation. Actually, I think they already said that they will in a few races. They're going to have a new package coming out. But just on to what you're saying, like that's that championship mentality. Like that's that mindset, you know, like Fernando Alonso, he's a champion. He's a fierce competitor. So why would you want to settle for a team that is only going to shoot for fourth place, right? You want to go to a championship winning team. He wants another championship. He wants to at least get on the podium, which he did now. He wants to be on that top step on the podium. So why would he shoot for a team that's only going to get fourth place and maybe get a podium once, you know, every blue moon?
Yeah.
So I definitely, I respect that. And I think a lot of the other teams need to start adopting that mentality because, I mean, you're like, nobody wants to be best of the rest. Like you want to be the best. If you're in Formula One, you should be striving to be a champion eventually, you know? And I think Aston Martin has done a great job of laying out that plan, you know, spearheaded by Lawrence Stroll, laying out that plan, and they're actually making headway, and they're proving that they're serious, and he's putting his money where his mouth is.
And doing it, doing it well.
Sure.
I mean, that's a competitive car. If they can keep the development up, which all things point to they should be able to, we might have an interesting shakeup here because
the only thing that is going through my mind and concerns me is what if like some scandal comes out, like you hear about how the Ferrari had that unknown like engine, you know, violation before, and then they had to turn that down and they were complete dog shit for a couple of years. Like, what if something like that comes out where like, you know, performance enhancing drugs on that level with the car, you know? Like,
I mean, you know, it's absolutely happening. It's just, can you hide it well enough?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
That's exactly right.
Rubbin's racing, Harry.
Yeah, it would be. That'd be pretty crazy. But man, the shakeup is real. I'm excited to see what Mercedes does because I don't expect them to be sitting in the sidelines for long. I mean, I will say I'm surprised based on the last couple of races of last year how competitive that Mercedes was. Seems to be. I don't know if everyone else took a step forward and they didn't, or if they took a slight step back. But it's definitely not as competitive as it was last year at the end of the
year. Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, it's one of those things like, you know, we talked about before where I think you were the one saying that they had stuck with the zero pod idea and concept, because if they change that up, they would have to completely redevelop the car because everything in that car was designed around that aero package. And, you know, I think they tried to make it work, but it's interesting to see now that you're at race one, even before the race even started, and they're already throwing up their hands. Lewis had that interview where he basically said this package is not going to work.
Yep.
I think Toto had the interview where he said that they already plan on changing it up. But it's crazy to see that they went through the entire offseason and they're like, all right, we got to stick with this. And then finally they get to testing and they're like, nope, we're done. We can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
So I'm anxious and I'm interested to see what this new package looks like. Like you said, probably, you know, somewhere along the lines of Red Bull. But how much of an effect is that going to have? Like, are they going to come out the gates like firing as soon as that happens, or is it going to take a while? I'm sure they're going to have to do a lot more like testing, you know, practice sessions, even in the race, getting data and, you know, upgrading slowly. So we'll see what happens with
Absolutely. But I guess to play devil's advocate there, like, you know, everything's a marathon and this is a marathon over years. Like, we're not having a crazy regulation change till 2026. So do you sacrifice a season where you're looking at P4 to probably redevelop and end up P4 anyway, to probably next year after that, be capable of competing for P1, hopefully, right? Like, I wouldn't put Mercedes down to not be competing at P1. So, I mean, if you look at the distance that you need to go with this package and you see the Cannon style cars of Red Bull, of Aston Martin, of frickin' Williams, we're going to talk about Williams in a second. You see how well that package is working. It'd be pretty hard not to be like, hey, we should probably be
for
switching.
sure. Yep. Not a bad move on their end.
And I mean, kind of kudos to them for at least admitting defeat. Like, hey, we tried something and it didn't work. So
yeah.
Williams, P10, P12.
How exciting.
Points on their first race of the season. And that car looked quick.
Yeah.
It looked
That
good.
was awesome.
I'm like happily proven wrong so far that Williams isn't, you know, P10 of a constructor. You know, that looks like currently Mercedes and Haas.
Yep. You got Logan Sargent, man.
Not Mercedes, I'm sorry, McLaren and Haas. Logan Sargent, P12. He did awesome. Several overtakes. I think he had 3 or 4 overtakes. Yeah, I was impressed.
He beat out Logan Sargent, beat out De Vries, Hulkenberg, Piastri.
K-Mag.
That was awesome to see. K-Mag too. Yep. Best of the rookies.
Yeah, he crushed it. I was super impressed with how well Hulkenberg did. Zhou Guan Yu, I'm not sure what was so let's talk about some of the outliers. I even kind of wrote down my 10 constructors, and it's, you know, right now I have it sitting at Red Bull, Aston, Ferrari, Merc for top 4. Bottom 3 I have McLaren, Haas, and AlphaTauri. But we have Williams, Alfa Romeo, and Alpine sitting in like unknown midfield land. Right? Because you look at Alpine and you look at Ocon getting beaten to death by penalties with the DNF, but then you go look at Pierre Gasly, he came out P9 and he started P20.
Right, yeah.
That's huge. That's a
Pierre Gasly had a huge race.
Yes. You don't hear a lot about that because he only ended P9, but like he had the most overtakes. Like, what a race. You look at Williams, P10, P12. I mean, that's really solid for both of them. You look at Alfa Romeo, you have Valtteri Bottas, mullet gloriously flowing in P8. But then you got Zhou Guan Yu sitting down in 16th.
Yeah.
So
a lap
it's like,
down.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really place the middle 3 right now. I'm kind of feeling Williams is probably going to be the bottom of those 3. Just historically, they've taken a huge step forward, but I don't know if they have the driver package to compare all things equal to Bottas and even potentially Gasly. But
right, but even having them in the conversation of a midfield team,
yes,
is a huge increase from where they've been in the past recent history, basically.
Huge. But yeah, I don't know. I still don't have an opinion on Alpine and Alfa Romeo. I know they're midfield, but how midfield, how fast? I mean, it's still a little bit all over the place.
Did they even say why they retired Ocon, or was it just because he had so many penalties and they just wanted to save the car?
Yeah, pretty much that's what they said. save the power unit. They were like, this is ridiculous.
Why are we even here?
You know, there's two sides to that, though. They kept Norris out there. He had quite a few pit stops where, like, they just basically...
6 to be exact.
6 pit stops, yeah. I couldn't remember what the number was, but they were basically just continuing testing. I mean, you're going to test it live. Everyone else was at their fastest. Like, hey, tweak some things, change some things, come in for a pit. We're not getting any points, but hey, we can get another hour of testing in.
They need to. Like I texted you yesterday, it was a complete McLaren choke show. And like they need to test and do as much as they can to get that car where it needs to be to put them back up in the midfield. Because this is abysmal what we saw yesterday out of McLaren.
Yeah, could not be any worse. I mean, we knew they were going to be bad. That was real bad. And then Haas, who I was talking up for testing how good they looked, were horrible.
Yeah, they did not do very well. Like it was a few laps into it, and both of the Haas cars found themselves down towards the back of the pack.
Yeah, Hulkenberg took the end plate off of his front wing, had to come in for a front wing swap out, and I mean, not a good showing from Haas. I would not have. I can't wait for Drive to Survive to see Gunther go. I have to go call Gene.
Yeah, I have to call Gene. You know what? Maybe if they had more people on the pit wall.
The pit wall is so small. Every time the helicopter flies over it, and there's Haas.
Oh, man.
What a good first race, though. And I mean, it probably wasn't all that entertaining for new watchers, but for like the strategeries and the shakeups and, all of that, I enjoyed the crap out of it, just seeing where everyone ended up.
I have seen a lot of posts on different like Formula One forums or Facebook groups and stuff, and people are like, "Oh, here comes another boring season with Max just out in front." And I'm like, yeah, that's gonna happen, right? But that's not where the race is at. Like Max, they didn't show Max barely at all, and it didn't matter. There was a lot of other action going on. Like, yeah, so what? They're gonna win, but look at everything else that's happening.
Yeah. There's such a shakeup. Like the fights between Alonso and Hamilton, I'm so excited for more of those.
Oh, I can't wait. I know, man.
I'm so excited for the next Ferrari to catch on fire. It's going to happen. I'm calling it. All right, so heroes and zeros, Kurt. This is your section you wanted to do, so you start us off.
Sweet. So every GP race, we're going to do a section at the end called Heroes and Zeros. So we're going to do our top 3 and our bottom 3 from the race. And this is going to be not just drivers. It could be drivers. It could be constructors. It could be team principals. Hell, it could be, Roscoe, Lewis Hamilton's dog, if he impacts the race somehow. So heroes and zeros. I'm going to start off. We'll start off with zeros and then we'll do our heroes, right? So my zeros for the race, for the Bahrain GP, are going to be McLaren, Ocon, and my third zero is going to be Ferrari. And so for McLaren, like we said, this was absolutely abysmal. It was a terrible performance. You had Piastri out on lap 15. You had Norris, who from all accounts, had some sort of hydraulic or pneumatic issue. So he kept having to come in for that. And then it just turned into a test session for them because there's no point in trying anything else. So that was a clear zero for me. Ocon, I mean, the penalties, even the ones that, the mechanic penalty wasn't necessarily his fault, but he was still having to serve that penalty for something that he did. And then just, penalty after penalty, like Ocon was just not good. And then Ferrari, like, come on, man. Ferrari with the, I'm so flustered. Ferrari with Leclerc's car going out with whatever that issue was. Then you had Carlos Sainz, who just not on the pace, like he was still there, but he wasn't on the pace. He was able to hold off Hamilton at the end, which I was hoping for a better, a battle there. Just seemed like Hamilton maybe his tires ran out when he was trying to catch up to him. But Ferrari, for me, man, they just back to doing Ferrari things, and it's just unacceptable.
Yeah, man.
What about you?
We should maybe coordinate this because I have the exact same zeros. McLaren, for all the reasons you said. Ocon, for all the reasons. I mean, if I was Alpine and Ocon, I think I'd be contesting a little bit. Like another 5-second penalty for 0.1 kph over the, pit lane or the pit lane speed limit. I mean, how many cars do you watch lock it up?
Yeah.
Huge plume of smoke all the way through that like line, and they don't get penalized. I think the stewards are kind of, I don't know if they were trying to make a point or what. They made a point though. Like
They did. Hey, don't break the rule. The rule's the rule.
The rule's the rules. They weren't messing around. And then yeah, Ferrari for all the reasons. It almost looks like I had a lot of hope. You watch Fred Vasseur and a lot of, you know, what the rhetoric coming out of Ferrari has been. They looked great in testing. You have a great driver lineup. I mean, they should, for all intents and purposes, be up there competing. And then you have an engine failure, you know, which this happened to Red Bull last year.
True, it did.
Right, they did.
A double
they
DNF.
fixed it right out of the gate. But it just looks like a continuation. I mean,
it's
like
the issue with Ferrari is now it's becoming an ongoing issue, like to the point where it's a complete ongoing joke. And so, I mean, they need to fix that. Anytime they have any small issue, it's going to have a spotlight on it because of their past.
Yeah.
So they need to get a handle on that.
Yeah, it was, they were clear losers. And I still, like, kind of the Checo Sainz argument, I was not impressed with Sainz. He was way off the pace of Leclerc. He was getting ran down by Lewis Hamilton. And, you know, Lewis basically said afterward, you know, Lewis was ecstatic with how they finished, but he was just like, I didn't have the car, you know, to pass Sainz. It wasn't that, oh, Sainz was quick or Sainz, you know, it was just like, man, I could, if I had a little more car, Sainz would have been mine. And they talked about how much downforce they took out of that Mercedes, and Lewis was just like, you know, I couldn't turn. I had so much understeer because we had taken so much downforce out of it.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's not what you want to hear if you're Carlos Sainz and arguably probably the second fastest car on the track. You're getting ran down by a Mercedes, which is clearly a number 4 on the track. Like, that's not a good
step it up.
Not good all the way around. So clear zeros. I agree across the board. Winners.
All right. What do you got for heroes?
Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin can't, like, in any way, shape, or form dispute that they won that. Williams, I think it was a huge win for Williams, for Albon and Logan Sargent. I was super impressed with how they finished, how they, you know, and I think this is kind of part of the point of us doing this section is to take the look off of that P1, who's on the podium and what's happening in the back. And I mean, Williams took such a leap forward. It was very impressive. And then I threw it in there because it's kind of, you can make an argument in a lot of other ways, but I had to, for the first race, Red Bull. I mean, they won, like, and they've come out, they had a dominant car last year, but towards the end of the year, you know, everyone was catching them. They looked great in testing, but we don't, you know, you never know till it's lights out and away we go, and they dominate again. So I'm going to, hopefully this is the only time I'm going to give them the winners, and they're just kind of riding off in the sunset, but I had to give it to them on the first one. Yeah,
they earned it. All right, so for my heroes, a little bit of overlap. So I've got a little bit of overlap with you, but I'm going to start off by getting a little more specific with my first one.
All
right. You said Alonso and Aston Martin. My hero for this
is
first
Lance
race.
Stroll.
No, definitely not. But I and I'll tell you why. I'm saying Lawrence Stroll, right? Big Stroll. And because I couldn't pick just one, because we had Alonso, who put that car on the podium, did an amazing job. We've already talked about his fights with Hamilton and Sainz and all that, and just what he did over the entire weekend. That car and his driving was incredible. You had Lance Stroll, who I've said before is not that bad of a driver, makes stupid damn mistakes, and he did it all in this race.
He's that
soon as the race started, just right into Alonso.
Stupid face.
And then after that, he got it together and he ended up P6. He didn't do any testing in the car. He had surgery 2 weeks ago. He broke both wrists, apparently broke a toe as well. Like this guy, like, I don't know what happened, what kind of bike accident this was. So he's got 2 broke wrists, a broke toe, and still is able to put that car into P6, which I don't know if is more of saying more about the car or proving the point that he's actually a somewhat decent driver whenever he's got his head on straight.
It's the car.
And the team, yeah, right. And the team itself just everything they've done, and I'm putting it all on Lawrence Stroll's shoulders. I think that his leadership in turning this team around is the common denominator and the biggest factor in Aston Martin's resurgence. So he's my hero for the weekend. Still don't like his face, but good for Lawrence Stroll.
Good for I totally agree there. I was going to make a joke, or not, about Mike Crack again. It's interesting, though, that it is Lawrence Stroll and not Mike Crack. Like, I don't know what jobs he as team principal is doing. Maybe he's kind of doing the admin stuff, but I totally agree with you that, like, it's kind of Lawrence. It feels like, and it appears that Lawrence plays a whole lot bigger role, probably even as the principal, than Mike Crack does.
From the outside perspective, for sure. And it's, you know, what's funny is I didn't even know who Mike Crack was until yesterday. Yesterday was the first time I even heard that name.
And I've been giggling ever since.
Yeah. All right. My second one, just like you, I do have Williams. You know, we've already said it. You got Albon in the points, Pete's in, and then you got Logan Sargent, Big Sarge, the American hero, coming in P12 on his Formula One debut in a Williams, and he's 2 spots away from the points, which is super impressive. So Williams, whatever they've done, continue doing that, because, you know, we might find them as being a solid midfield team this year.
Yeah.
And then for my last one, I do agree with you that Red Bull did amazing. But my last hero for the race, and it's the first time I've ever said this about him because I'm not the biggest fan, Pierre Gasly. I think what he did in that car, which preseason testing podcast that we did, you were saying you thought that Alpine was sandbagging. It looks like they forgot to take the bags out of the car for this race. But even still, Gasly was able to get that car all the way from 20th up into P9 at the end of the race. So I think that was super impressive. Gasly for sure has impressed his team and is probably the hero of France right now. So I'll say that he's my third hero.
I didn't know Gasly and Ocon grew up 30 miles apart.
Yeah, 30 miles apart. They've got a lot of history. And so one thing I was listening to, which we might have mentioned on the last one, was like their beef is like deep. Like their families apparently are beefing. It's like Romeo and Juliet level. So it's like for them
Which one's Juliet?
You know, now probably Ocon.
Yeah.
I would see it as Ocon.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
That'll be interesting.
But yeah.
All the commentators, everyone's like, we can't wait to see this one boil over.
Oh, everybody's waiting for it. It's going to explode at some point.
We just need Gasly to get away from the penalties.
Yes, exactly.
On the points, like the penalty points on his driver's license.
Yep. Because, you know, 2 more points and he's sitting out a race.
Yep. So, man, what a first race.
Hell yeah.
Awesome. We have Jeddah in Saudi Arabia next, which is a totally different track. We're going to do a whole nother podcast on what our predictions, forecasts, and thoughts are for that race. But I'm excited. Saudi Arabia is a totally different kind of track than Bahrain is. We have to wait 2 weeks, though.
2 weeks. And that's the way it is. I think we got spoiled by, what was that, 2020 and 2021, where you'd have like triple headers.
Yes.
Because they had to reshuffle the schedule so much. And now it's like 2 weeks is such a long time, but we just got off of a 100 and some day break. They could have at least done a doubleheader at the beginning of the season.
Right? I don't know. I think everyone in the back, McLaren and Haas, they're like, oh, thank God. We have 2 weeks to sort this thing out.
Oh, man. Well, yep, that was fun. So, again, 2 weeks, we'll do a predictions for the race, and then we'll do a race recap, of course, afterwards. I think this probably pretty much it. You got anything else, Dylan?
No, I think we hit it, man. Just awesome first race. It leaves a lot on the table for what's going to happen.
Hell yes. Cool. So if you're listening on audio, please go and give us a review and make sure and follow the podcast. And if this is on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe and make sure you share us with a friend. And on that note,
stay classy, America.
See you next time.